Today, I'm just curious. I'm joined by Michael Domanic, head of Generative AI Business Strategy at UserTesting, the world's leading on-demand human insights platform. Michael leads the company's internal AI transformation program, embedding AI into workflows across every function. He spent years building conversational AI and now focuses on making generative AI not just practical, but measurable. Today, we'll explore how he's doing that and what others can learn from his hands-on experience leading change at scale. Michael, welcome to Just Curious.
Thanks, Stu. It's great to be here.
You've worked across customer experience strategy and now AI transformation. Tell us a little bit about that journey that brought you to leading AI transformation at user testing.
Yeah, so I mean, the journey actually starts before I was actually at user testing. I used to be a customer of user testing. So during chatbot hype cycle 1.0, which is what I call it, so that takes us to the period of like 2016 to 2019, 2020. I was designing a lot of conversational interface experiences. In that era, every brand wanted a Facebook Messenger chatbot, or later that became Slack bots, Skype bots. The backdrop to all of that was conversational interface was proliferating in homes across America via Alexa and Google Assistant and Google Home. So I actually used to work with companies designing those experiences and used to test it at user testing. Joined user testing. I've had a lot of different roles in the organization. And in November of 2022, when OpenAI launched, Transformer 3.5, like that felt to me like we were kind of going back to that moment that I was in before user testing, albeit with much better technology. So it just really felt like the time for our company to wrap our arms around this, embrace it. I had a lot of support from leadership to really push that mission forward.
Can you tell us a little bit more about user testing and why is AI so important to the future of the business?
Yeah, so user testing is a platform that our customers use to create great experiences for their customers, right? So a lot of times our platform is getting used by designers, by UX researchers, but also by folks from marketing that want to test, their marketing campaigns, copy, images, all that stuff. And I think when it comes to AI at user testing, there's two really important ways that we use AI here. So one is the mission that I'm attached to, which is to transform our organization, transform the way that we work by embracing AI capabilities. And the second way that we really use AI is in our product, right? So like we're designing a lot of features within our product that make it easier for our customers to use our product, enhance the value that they get from our product by leveraging AI capabilities. The thing that I'm mostly focused on is the internal transformation thing. That's super important for user testing, and I think it's important for any company with a focus on knowledge work because we know how much the current AI capabilities can enhance the work that you're doing, create amazing efficiencies, help you create work faster, and really increase the strategy. So we know that's a possibility of user testing. So we're really, again, wrapping our arms around this and embracing those capabilities.
Many companies struggle to move past curiosity into implementation. What were the first signs rather at user testing that it was time to invest in a true AI transformation effort?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mentioned those two missions that we have to embrace AI and user testing, one in our product and, one to transform the organization. I think for us early on, we initially set out to integrate AI into our product. We had already been doing this, right? Even before the generative AI boom, we've been building machine learning, homegrown machine learning models since 2019 and putting that in our product. So again, it just felt very natural to us when these generative AI capabilities became available to businesses to build upon. That felt very natural. Now, the internal stuff, we had had a lot of conversations for probably a period of about 6 to maybe 10 months, call it. We had a lot of internal conversations, but like most organizations, we were trying to figure out how does this integrate, right? Like how do we actually use this to augment what we're doing? Um, yeah, I think in those early days, for me, it was kind of crucial to focus in on a specific use case. And the use case that I focused on is a problem that we dealt with and pretty much every other company deals with. And that's the problem of information fragmentation. So we have all of this information that gets disseminated across the organization. and it's in a lot of different places. Our sales team uses HighSpot, the rest of the company uses Confluence. There's other repositories of knowledge. I did an internal study that looked at the costs of the problem, and we were just losing way too much time because people were just hunting through all of the different resources, knowledge repositories that we have to find answers to simple questions. So actually what I did was in those early days is created a custom GPT that pulled all those knowledge resources together and did another study that showed how much of an improvement that was. And it was really clear to us at that time that we were saving a ton of time in folks trying to find answers to questions. We were also increasing the access to knowledge for folks. So in those early days, that study, that experiment that we did made it really clear what the possibility was throughout the rest of the organization.
What internal challenges did you face early on, either culturally or operationally, and how did you start to overcome them?
Yeah, I think we kind of face both challenges, both cultural and operational. I think the cultural stuff is probably stuff that like every organization was dealing with, continues to deal with. I think a lot of that has to do with people's trepidation about this, proliferation of AI. I make it really clear to our organization that I think the genie is out of the bottle when it comes. Like that genie is not going back in. I think we're all going to face this transformation sooner or later, probably sooner than later. And I think it's the responsibility of any employer that considers themselves a good employer to really lead their organization through this transformation, provide them with the tools, training, the enablement to be able to take that transformation on. I think that's a really important part of our mission. And again, this is something I talk to our organization about quite often. I think operational challenges like we're asking people to change a lot of their behavior, right? I think that's what successful transformation looks like when it comes to AI. And that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Changing behavior is a really hard thing to do. For us, once we decided that we were going to make investments here, we chose to use Enterprise ChatGPT as our center of gravity general purpose solution. We were deliberate about who we rolled that out to in the early days. So it wasn't full enterprise at that time. We handpicked individuals who we knew we were going to be our early adopters, who were going to talk about the interesting things that they were doing. And that to be a pretty good strategy for us because it created a little bit of virality.
Hmm.
It created a little bit of FOMO for the individuals who didn't have access. They were like, why does this person get access to this transformational tool and I don't, right? So that kind of helped us really like make this thing a little bit viral within the
Yeah.
company. A few months later, we went, wall to wall enterprise. That was in the summer of 2024. And by that point, a lot of that interest had been built up in the organization. So from an operational standpoint, a couple months into our deployment, a lot of people in the organization felt like they were ready to start experimenting.
Yeah. And when you picked those early adopters, did you reach out to people you thought had the potential to be kind of early testers? Did you pick a certain number of people within each business or functional unit? What did that look like?
Yeah, I think there were a couple things. So one is that this conversation had already been playing out in pockets of the organization. So we were aware of where that conversation was happening, who the players were that were involved in that conversation. These were individuals who conveyed a specific specific interest in doing this. So that was kind of like one way that we identified who those early adopters were. Another way is very early on in our Chat GPT deployment, we were invited to OpenAI to do a hackathon, a GPT hackathon. And then again, like we kind of handpicked a larger set of individuals to participate in that. And again, like that showed us who was really leaning in, who was really interested in experimenting. And so that was another kind of wave of early adopters. And then from that point, some awareness had kind of spread in the organization, some virality had spread through the organization, and a lot of other people were saying like, hey, like I've been reading a lot about this, I have my own personal account, maybe I've been using it for work, maybe I haven't, not going to tell you, right? But I would love to use it for work. And again, that was like maybe another wave of those early adopters. And maybe by that point enough of the organization had kind of realized that people that I work with are doing really interesting things. I want to do those interesting things too. So this interest kind of kept compounding over time.
You mentioned virality. Were there any things that you did to help facilitate virality and the sharing of what people were doing within the broader organization?
Yeah, we talked about this a lot in those days. I mean, we still do, but what we did was in lunch and learns or at all hands meetings, anytime a large kind of cross section of the organization was getting together, we were talking about the things that the early adopters were doing, some of the experiments that they were running, some of the, those early days, like the GPTs that folks were creating. So yeah, this was something that we talked about to try to spread some of that interest and that virality.
Yeah. And in terms of how they were using it, did you shape that use at all with the early adopters? Did you allow them to freestyle based on how they were using it already and maybe what problems they saw it could be helpful to solving for them? How did that use kind of manifest itself?
I think it was both things that you mentioned. We had spent a lot of time thinking about what are the really interesting ways, the meaningful ways that we could bring this into our organization. As we identified those interesting use cases, sure, we shared that out with our early adopters and saying, like, hey, try this or try this. Folks were also doing a lot of experiments, right? They were figuring out other interesting things to do with the tool. So there was a lot of knowledge sharing that helped other people figure out, like, hey, like this person's doing this. I might not do that exact thing, but that gives me an idea over here. I think the genesis of this is really to spur on that conversation that was happening in places like a dedicated Slack channel of at that point it was like our AI experimenters Slack channel. We were getting together regularly as a group, an early adopters group to again, have these conversations, talk about the interesting things that we're doing, the interesting things that we're learning. How are the models changing? How do those changes impact other things that we might be able to do?
Yeah. You mentioned that early adopters and then I guess some of the later adopters were actively experimenting. Some were building GPTs and sharing them with the organization. Sounds like a very kind of bottoms up effort. Was there a top down strategy that you then layered on? And yeah, tell us a little bit more about that. When did you decide to layer on a top-down strategy? What did it look like, and how did that play out?
Yeah, I think that top-down strategy actually came first. So in those, again, early days with the top-down strategy, the first thing that was established here at User Testing was an AI working group, an AI governance group, where we had identified what are the possibilities with these tools, right? Like just a cross-functional group of people, leaders from around the organization, having a conversation about what are the possibilities here? What's the art of the possible? Then that quickly turned into what are the security implications? What are the legal implications? Do we create an AI usage guideline? Do we create an internal AI manifesto about what do we do with the tools? How do we use it? Why are we doing this? So yes, I mean, like that is all stuff that was kind of happening in the very, very early days. I think before we even rolled out any general purpose tools. And then once we felt like we were ready to roll those tools out because we had some basic infrastructure in place, then that's when we kind of went out to our early adopters and said, "You have access to this tool now. You're one of our early adopters. You're one of our champions. Let's figure out how we use this."
What did that initial governance look like, and what was your approach to balancing innovation and experimentation with legal or ethical or security concerns?
So yeah, and like I said, their early governance was a cross-functional group of people. So people from legal, security, our CEO, our CTO, leaders from product, leaders from engineering, right? Like basically like any part of the organization that we felt like was going to get impacted by this transformation had a seat at the table and still do. Like that's still a group that exists and we still meet on a very regular basis. In those early days, it was super important for us to figure out what are those legal and security implications. So the security implications, pretty obvious, right? If we're using this tool for putting sensitive data, company data into this tool, is that going to show up in the response of somebody's prompt outside of our company, right? Like we didn't want that to get leaked. So we worked with our partners to make sure that we were operating in an environment that our data, our prompts, everything that we're doing doesn't train the model. think obviously like that's a really important for probably most, if not all businesses. I think when we, in those early days as well, the other thing that's really important for us to figure out was, there's people across our organization that have access to all sorts of sensitive data. What data is a no-go for us? What data can we not use in any AI context? And what data can we be more liberal about? User testing has I would say, a relatively cautiously liberal AI governance policy. There are definitely classes of data that no one can ever use in context of AI. And a lot of that is our customer data.
Yeah.
So earlier we talked about how our customers use user testing. They capture feedback on, what it's like to be their customer. Maybe they're designing a new mobile application and they have a Figma prototype. They're getting feedback on that Figma prototype via our platform. They own all of that, right? Like our customers own all of that data. Very few people in the organization would even have access to that data. And for those that do, they know, and I remind them about this every single day, no customer data could ever be used in an AI context unless that's in our product, unless we have agreements, with our
Right.
customers, they invoke it, right? Like that's something separate. But when you're using LLMs on a day-to-day basis, you're just never going to use that data. There are other like classes of data as well, like PII, obviously, like we don't want to use that. Don't put your credit card in, right? Like don't put employee names and addresses, like stuff like that. But I think every organization needs to figure out what their data strategy is and make sure that that gets clearly and regularly communicated throughout the company.
Right. You mentioned the building of custom GPTs. I guess a first step is identifying a use case or a problem to solve. What do you look for when you are looking for a good use case for AI?
That is a great question. So that's not always me making that decision. We have fully democratized the building of custom GPTs throughout the organization. We talk about this a lot in the company. We create GPTs that are, intended to be used by essentially everyone in the company. And everyone in the company has the ability to create them. They don't need to come to me and say, like, hey, like I want to do this thing with custom GPTs. Is it okay if I do this? Right? As long as it fits into, our governance policies, like that's totally fine. Like create a custom GPT. I think like the larger question might be what are custom GPTs good at and like what should
Mm.
companies be thinking about using them for? I think like GPTs are really great at any kind of repetitive workflow that you might be doing. I'll give you an example. Like I have a GPT that analyzes our usage and adoption for all of our AI tools, right? Like I get that from the vendor. It's often like a massive data dump that they give to me that I have to like sift through. But I've created a custom GPT that analyzes all of that, spits out reports. I send those reports to leaders in the organization. They can see what their teams are doing, right? Like that's a great use case for a GPT. And it's just me using that GPT.
Yeah.
Other use cases for GPTs that are used across our organization, as we have one that creates OKRs for everyone in the company.
Mm.
I don't want anyone in our company to like have to spend the time to write really great OKRs. Like you shouldn't have to be good at writing OKRs. That's a distraction from the thing that you're hired at. Like if you're a salesperson, you're hired because you're a great salesperson, not because you're great at writing OKRs.
Right.
I have great OKRs. Like I want you to have like a really awesome roadmap that ladders to the larger goals of the organization, but you certainly don't need to be good at creating them. And that's what that GPT does, right? That GPT is trained on here are the large goals of the organization. Here's our executive goals, senior leadership team, middle management, and then individual contributors. So wherever you sit in the organization, the GPT already knows what are the goals for essentially everyone above you in this company. Tell us what you're working on. Okay, here's a great set of OKRs for you. You could also bring OKRs that you've written and ask the GPT to refine them for you. Like these are specific examples, but every company has maybe hundreds, if not thousands, of potential use cases for these custom GPTs, custom solutions. And it really just reverse engineers to where you can make the most impact.
Yeah. Are there problems or use cases that require a custom solution where a GPT is just not, I guess, good enough and you need to build custom software? And how do you make that decision?
So yeah, I mean, like this conversation is really focused on custom GPTs, but like one thing that we have had a little bit of a struggle with is when you're training a custom GPT, you're training it on external data, right? You're training it on data that OpenAI just doesn't have access to today through their general purpose models. That's the benefit of a custom GPT. Two ways to train a custom GPT. One is through static knowledge documents that create a PDF, put it in the GPT, tell the GPT, here's what's in this document. Here's when you're going to use and reference this document. Another way is by creating an API connection, establishing an API connection into a third-party source via the actions feature in GPTs. So we've done a lot of that. Like we've done a lot of experimentation with that actions feature. Doesn't always work as well as advertised. Sometimes we're blowing through context window limitations in the GPTs, which are much smaller than if you're building on the OpenAI API. Sometimes APIs are just not structured in a way that's useful for the GPT. So yeah, like those are when it's kind of like maybe simplify this by saying if you want a dynamic data pull, most of the time, not all the time, like sometimes the GPTs are good at this, but most of the time you might need some kind of like more robust custom solution outside of a GPT. Maybe at that point you're developing on top of one of the APIs, the
Yeah,
frontier APIs.
gotcha. Um, how do you make sure the work that you and your organization are doing has a measurable business impact? How do you talk about the ROI of this transformation?
Yeah, I think ROI is actually pretty important. There are other characters like me, running like AI programs that say like you don't need to measure ROI because it's obvious, like everyone's going to get like massive return on this. I think it's actually important to measure ROI for two reasons. One, at least two reasons. One is we want to be able to tell our executives, and our boards, this is, we're spending all this money and this is the return that we're getting out of this, right? So I think there's just like some fiscal responsibility and making sure that you're making good investments. I think the second reason is in going through that exercise, you can actually start to prioritize which projects are we getting the most value out of. Maybe you double down on those projects, or maybe you create projects like that in another part of the business to continue to get high return on investment. So how do we do that at user testing? I think it depends on the project. And a lot of times this is actually connected to custom GPTs, but there are certainly some of these projects, some of these custom GPTs, we will look at the before and after state. So the before state is it took us this long to do this thing. This is the level of quality. This is the level of rigor. For example, you might be creating a GPT to augment marketing campaigns. You're not only making those marketing campaigns better, but you could probably do more of them because you're instilling a lot of efficiency in the process. So we've done that as well, right? So like there's a before and after state. The before state is this is what that looks like in the business today. The after state is now we're creating marketing campaigns where we're getting better returns on, and we can do more of these. We know what the average value is per campaign. So if we can increase that by 30%, then we have a pretty good calculation of what that return is. These are kind of like the modeling that we do for a lot of the projects that we work on here at user testing.
Yeah. We talked about how you've been enabling AI adoption across the organization. Are there particular business units or functional units where the use cases are more prevalent or impactful or have the biggest ROI?
I think, yeah, there's probably two areas of the business that are most meaningful to us right now. I would say this, like, I think the caveat here is like, there's probably no part of our business that doesn't get massive return by doing this stuff, right? But I think the two areas of our business where we probably get, it feels like the lowest hanging fruit on return on investment is one, sales, right? Go to market. We want to be able to sell, more software, retain more customers. And there's a lot of opportunities for us to bring AI into the process to help us do that, right? So that's an obvious one. I think the second one is how do we use AI tools to increase rigor and efficiency when we're writing code? We're a software company, right? So we're building a technical product. And the more we can enhance that process, the more product that we can ship, the better our products become. Like probably for most SaaS businesses, like those are that's like the low hanging fruit.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit about efficiency? For a lot of people, efficiency is code for fewer people in the future. How do you think about efficiency and AI and the future of workforce?
Yeah. So I think this is probably going to look different for every company. I can tell you how we look at it here at user testing is certainly by integrating AI capabilities into, your workflows and your process of conducting work, you create greater efficiencies, right? You could save yourself, maybe it's 12 hours a week, maybe it's 3 days a week, whatever that is. So then the question becomes is what do you replace with that time? Are you reducing headcount and just doing the same level of work with less people? That's not that interesting to us. I think we're far more interested in doing more with more, right? So like, okay, everybody saves 12 hours of their week. Now we can focus on other areas of the business, other challenges. We're just better positioned to create a better company by being able to do more. And I think that is by far the most interesting way that AI impacts our business is we can do more with more.
As we come to a close, I'd love to ask some recommendation related questions based on your own experience. And so, I guess, firstly, for leaders who are starting to embed AI in their teams today, what's the first step that you'd recommend?
I think the first step is to figure out who's going to lead that effort in your organization. This is not the side gig of a half a dozen people in your company. I mean, maybe for companies a half a dozen people, maybe it is, right? But like if you've got at least maybe like 200 to 300 people in your company, you want to appoint somebody that this is going to be their dedicated mission. And that person, I talk about this a lot, like that person has four key characteristics. One is they're fluent in AI tools. That seems like an obvious one, right? Like you want somebody that's going to understand what the capabilities are and make sure we understand how those capabilities connect to the business. I think the second thing is this person knows enough about the business that they kind of understand how it all comes together, right? You're not an expert in HR, but you understand what HR does. You're not an expert in marketing, but you know what marketing does, right? So a person that understands or knows enough to be dangerous around all functions of the business. The third relatively obvious one, they know how to get stuff done, right? Like anytime we ask somebody to lead something important, they should be someone that knows how to get stuff done. The fourth characteristic, I think, is the least obvious and most important, and these are deeply creative individuals. The reason why that's important is because we've never deployed a technology like generative AI in our businesses before, right? It's a pretty abstract technology. It is not like deploying a CRM like Salesforce, right? When you're deploying Salesforce, you're going to teach your users to push that button, pull that lever, get that output. That output every time. Every time you push that button, you're going to get that output. With generative AI, it's very different. It's very abstract. And you need someone that's going to be able to think creatively about how to translate that abstract layer into something that feels real and tangible for people across the company.
Does that creativity suggest they come from a particular part of the organization, or are there ways to, I don't know, evaluate the creativity of I'm just picking some random business units, a finance person, HR person?
I don't know is the answer to that question. Like, I'm not really sure. I can tell you this. Yeah, like it could be a finance person, sure. Like it could be the CTO. It could be anyone in the company. I don't think that the AI transformation lead comes from any one specific discipline. Like there are creative individuals across all different roles in a company. And by the way, in business, we have a term for this creativity in business. Typically, we call them entrepreneurs. Like entrepreneurs is really a different way of saying someone that thinks really creatively about business application. And usually they think so creatively about it that they go and create something, right? Like they create something out of nothing. Yeah, like if you're looking for who are the individuals that might possibly be really creative enough to be able to handle this, it might be people with an entrepreneurial background. Maybe I don't know, maybe they do like woodworking on their weekends, right? Like that's a creative activity. I don't think there's like really like a paradigm like that you can follow to say like, okay, like if we look at all of these different variables, like that's going to lead us to this person. I think you just have to be a little bit creative, right? Like be a little
Yeah.
bit of creative about who that creative person is.
What's the role of the founder or CEO in a transformation like this?
I guess founder implies like more early stage. I think, yeah, CEO. Look, at the end of the day, your AI transformation is a top-down, bottom-up approach. And we talked about different ways that that happens. Neither is negotiable, right? You have to have both. And I think the top-down approach, it's super important for a CEO to regularly communicate with the organization about why you're doing this, about how you're doing this, like how important this is to the company that we actually move through some kind of transformation and embrace this. The CEO is going to set the tone. Like you're asking that question, and I immediately think about the internal Shopify memo that
Mm.
like was pretty aggressive, right? Like that was a pretty aggressive memo that came from the CEO. And I think when I first read that, I had like a negative reaction to it. But then I like stopped and I read it again. And I thought like I actually agree with like pretty much everything that the CEO is saying. But the tone of that memo was a little bit too harsh, right? So, like, I think the CEO is really important to one, say, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, but be able to deliver that in a way that inspires the organization to follow the mission.
How should the CEO be using generative AI themselves? And I'm especially interested in CEOs who are non-technical, like Toby, obviously technical, likely to be playing around with new technologies all the time, but many CEOs are not technical. What role should AI play for the CEO and how they do their jobs and run their business?
Yeah, I don't think technical versus non-technical is like really relevant here. I think when you're talking about a CEO, that's a strategic person, right? That's a person that is setting the strategy and the direction of the company. That's maybe the most high value use case for AI. Generally, in a business filled with knowledge workers, you use AI in three ways. You use it as an intern, you use it as an assistant, and you use it as a thought partner. Like the intern use cases and the assistant use cases are kind of like the lower level, but still very valuable use cases. But there is no use case that nearly touches the value of using it as a thought partner. We see CEOs that are using AI to help prepare for their board meetings, help write their board letters, right? That those are great use cases for AI. You're using it as a strategic partner. You're using it to say, here's how I'm thinking about this specific strategy in our organization. What are my blind spots? What are the other things that I should be doing? Help me understand, how to think about this. It may be an even more strategic layer. Or like, hey, I'm going to go in front of my board next week. Here's our board deck. What holes are they going to poke in our strategy? What questions should I be prepared for? By the way, I think everyone in the company should be using it for those types of use cases. But yeah, like especially a CEO. A CEO is probably not going to like use AI every day to write their emails, but they should be using it pretty regularly to again be a thought partner.
Last question. Do you think AI adoption will become a competitive differentiator, or do you think it ultimately becomes table stakes for every organization, or both?
I think it's both. I think it's both today. To me, it feels like table stakes. It feels like, every company, I think, has really turned the corner on recognizing how important this is and how important it is to like really start transforming the way that we work around AI capabilities. So yeah, like not every company has done this though, right? Like not every company has even taken the first steps to do this. And if you have taken steps and if you're moving your way through that transformation, I do definitely think that is a differentiator.
Awesome. Michael, I really appreciate you coming by, just curious and sharing your perspectives from helping user testing enable a top down and bottoms up AI program. And I wish you the best of luck.
Thanks, Stu. It was great to chat with you.